Good morning, everyone, et bonjour tout le monde. My name is Sharon Squire, and I'm a member of the Ottawa branch of the National Association of Federal Retirees. I am delighted to welcome you to our webinar today on dementia prevention with Dr. Antoine Hakim from the University of Ottawa. Bienvenue, Dr. Hakim. Nous sommes très heureux de vous avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. I would like to begin by recognizing the First Nations on whose traditional lands our branch office is located. This is unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe peoples. And given that the 30th is the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, this is really important. And on a great news front, today's webinar is one of the largest we've ever had, with over 800 members and their guests attending. Merci beaucoup à tous pour votre intérêt pour ce sujet important. And a special thank you to Ottawa branch members Sam and Utra Bergava, who are responsible for engaging Dr. Hakim to speak to us today. You can see Sam and Utra on your screen. They are tremendous supporters of medical research and both recently received the Governor General's Meritorious Service Medal for their leadership, advocacy, and philanthropy to help improve the lives of those living with neurodegenerative diseases and spinal cord injuries. Sam, would you like to say a few words?
Sure. Thank you very much, Sharon, for your kind remarks, and hello to fellow retirees. Working with your passionate team to connect with the most distinguished speaker on this nationally critical topic has been a pleasure. You are in for a treat for dementia prevention by my friend, colleague, and mentor, Dr. Tony Hakim, who will be more formally introduced by you shortly. You'll be learning based on the latest research findings and unlearning some outdated information. Could you please share this information with your friends and relatives? Thank you very much.
Well, merci, Sam, and you are so correct. This is such an important topic. We also encourage everyone who is not yet a member of our association to consider joining us in receiving the many benefits of membership. I know I'm enjoying them. Nous espérons que cet exemple de ce que notre association offre à ses membres contribuera à convaincre les invités de nous rejoindre. We will be sending out an email after the webinar today that will explain how to join us, as well as the instructions to access the video recording of this webinar. And as Sam said, we encourage you to spread the word on this webinars. Nous enregistrons ce webinaire et rendrons l'enregistrement disponible pour visualisation sur notre site web. And before I introduce Dr. Hakim, I'd just like to review a few process details for our session. While the Zoom invitation was for 60 minutes, given the importance of this topic, we would like to continue until 10 minutes after the hour. If you can stay and join us, that would be wonderful, because we want to have time for some questions and answers. Dr. Hakim will present for 50 minutes. Following the presentation, there will be a Q&A session. So in order to help us with this, to ask a question, click on the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen, which will open the Q&A window. Type your question into the window and then click Send to submit your question. Tapez votre question dans la fenêtre Questions et répondre, puis cliquez sur Envoyer pour soumettre votre question. You will be able to see the questions that others have asked in the question box. And please click on the thumbs up icon to indicate the questions that are most important to you, because given our short period of time, we'll focus on those with the most thumbs up. So thank you. Now it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. Hakim, who is an Emeritus Professor, both with the University of Ottawa Brain and Mind Institute and the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. Dr. Hakim was the founding CEO and scientific director of the Canadian Stroke Network and the University of Ottawa Brain and Mind Research Institute. He has received many honors, during his career, including the Officer of the Order of Canada and the Canada Gairdner Wightman Award, often referred to as the Baby Nobel for his outstanding research into stroke and championing stroke prevention and treatment. Dr. Hakim is also the author of the book, Save Your Mind, 7 Rules to Avoid Dementia. And we will include the reference to his book in our follow-up email. And now, over to our special guest speaker, Dr. Hakim. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm very honored to be talking to all of you, and I want to start this talk by thanking all of you individuals who have worked for the federal government for all the services you have rendered to our country. I am very grateful and very happy to be sharing this talk with you. So we're going to address the issue of dementia, which is something that terrifies all of us individually, especially if we have observed it in members of our families. The first slide shows that there is almost 1 million of us who are currently suffering with this problem. And half of the people suffering with cognitive impairment, which is what we call dementia, is growing by 1 person every 5 minutes. Within the next few years, there will be 2.4 million of us, and 15% of those who are impaired with dementia are actually young, under 65. The last item is one that worries me, which is that by 2040, which is in a few years from now, the cost of managing dementia will actually exceed our current total healthcare budget. Dementia is more than memory difficulties. Affected persons can exhibit agitation, aggression, depression, apathy, inappropriate behavior. And when we think about dementia, we rapidly come to a condition called Alzheimer's disease. And Alzheimer's disease is the main topic that I'm going to address in this conversation with you today. Number 4 says very clearly that Alzheimer's disease did not start when the patient began to exhibit memory difficulty. The brain had been suffering with problems for many years before the symptoms begin to appear. And that's very important. It's really the crucial point about how, even though your brain is working fine currently, you need to prepare yourself to prevent the onset of dementia over time. Here is a slide that's very important. The part of your brain that stores a lot of memories is called the hippocampus. And on this slide up here, A, the hippocampus is here, but you don't really see it because the cells are clear and there is nothing there to worry about. But when Alzheimer's begins, these cells seem to accumulate these dark deposits. And these deposits are proteins that we call plaques and tangles. The initial idea that we had when Mr. Alzheimer described these proteins accumulating in the memory center of the brain was very simple. Let's get rid of these proteins and then we will have the problem solved. So drug companies have spent billions testing drugs that remove the proteins in the plaques and tangles, and they have done so successfully, but without significant improvement in the cognitive challenges that the patient had been exhibiting. Drugs can ease some of the symptoms, but do not tackle the underlying disease. So what is going on? We thought that these proteins were the problem. Well, it turns out that the proteins are really that are deposited in the memory center of the brain called the hippocampus are really a consequence of the disease, not the disease itself. So let's get into the crux of the issue. Your brain weighs only 2% of your body weight. It does not beat like the heart or move like a muscle, and yet consumes 20% of the energy available to the whole body. Your brain is an energy pig. And 80% of patients who died with the diagnosis of Alzheimer's disease showed already some vascular abnormality in the brain. There was trouble with blood supply to the brain that resulted in the accumulation of those proteins in the hippocampus and the appearance of symptoms. Any condition that reduces blood supply to the brain will cause trouble with memory. And we now recognize that vascular risk factors are a predominant cause of dementia. And that is what makes it preventable, is that we know how to prevent vascular disease. Here is a very important study that was performed in Montreal. What they did was they performed a very large number of measurements, both in the brain with imaging, in the cerebrospinal fluid, and they looked for these proteins that accumulate in the hippocampus as we develop memory problems. And they did all of these measurements in patients, starting with healthy controls, that's HC down at the bottom, early mild cognitive impairment, late mild cognitive impairment, and late onset Alzheimer's disease. So they looked at all of these measurements as we progress from being completely normal to being sufferers with Alzheimer's disease. And what did they see? They wanted to know the sequence of events. It turned out that the very first thing that goes wrong is the vascular supply to the brain. That is the trigger that catapults all of the other symptoms that accumulate, including the accumulation of these proteins in the hippocampus. This implies that for most of us, dementia is a consequence of vascular disease, and it also implies that we can control a major part of how we age. Here is a study that more recently was performed to show that all participants showing baseline characteristics of participants with diagnosis and follow-up, that the problem that happens with dementia is anticipated by a number of other conditions, including poor education, lack of physical activity, and a number of other dietary issues that I will be describing in some detail. But this confirmed in 2022 the talk that, in fact, I'm going to share with you today. So, reviewing all of the literature on dementia, I have come up with 7 rules that you need to follow if you want to protect your brain from dementia. The first rule is put your brain to work. What do you do if you have a weak muscle? Well, you work it. You make it do what it wants to do, which is to work. What does the brain want to do? The brain wants to think, wants to remember. And so make it do that as much as you can in order for you to protect the brain from trouble. Number 2, make sure the brain is not suffering from vascular risk factors, because number 3, you have to protect your brain from damage and that predominantly says keep the vascular risk factors at bay, and the big one is high blood pressure. Put that salt shaker away because it leads to high blood pressure, and stop smoking. Number 4, eat well and avoid obesity, as I will show you in some of the slides. Number 5, move. Get out of breath once or twice a day by moving, because that gets the brain to become irrigated with blood, and it becomes a very important factor in protecting us from memory trouble. Active lifestyle is key. Number 6, you must sleep enough. And number 7, you must, as much as you can, avoid becoming sad or depressed for a prolonged period of time. Okay, let's get into it in some detail. Rule number 1, build up your cognitive reserve. Yes, you can build memory reserve in your brain that will be there to serve you later when you start running into trouble. Cognitive reserve can only be increased through persistent and varied cognitive activation that starts early. Later retirement age has been proven to be associated with a lower rate of cognitive decline, which is why Dr. Hakim at his age is still talking to you and giving you this information. Some people think that if they do Sudoku and puzzles all day long, that's going to protect their brain from dementia and cognitive impairment. The reality is that the brain wants variety. It gets bored if you do the same thing again and again. So you must stimulate your brain with a variety of activity to build cognitive reserve. Writing, reading, memorizing, calculating, planning, mapping, joining a choir, playing a musical instrument. And I must say, increasingly we recognize that all of the cognitive, that all of the electronic aids that we have are making it harder for us to commit things to memory. If we want to know the important dates for people who are important for us, our cell phone will tell us. And what that means is that, in fact, we don't know it. We haven't committed it to memory. We're depending on the cell phones to alert us to these important dates. And that's something that I think we have to be aware of as a potentially a problem. Here is a very important study that came to us from London, England. And that is that taxi drivers in London have to learn by heart all of the streets and all of the alleyways. No, they don't use Google Maps. They had to learn it all by heart. And so then they have to pass the exam. And some of them succeeded in passing the exam and some of them failed. So they compared the brains by imaging of those who had passed the exam to those who had failed that exam. And guess what? The brains of those who had passed the exam was actually bigger. The hippocampus in the brains of taxi drivers who had passed the exam was larger than the hippocampus of those who had failed the exam. What does that say? That says you can build the brain's mass up. You can build up your brain's structure by making your brain work. The second point that's very important is to avoid injuring the brain. If a patient has a stroke, that is going to accelerate the onset of dementia. Cognitive decline is present in more than 60% of patients who have suffered a stroke in the past 3 months. And the risk of dementia increases with time after stroke. Here is a patient who has suffered a stroke. Look, a major part of the brain has been damaged and has been replaced by cerebrospinal fluid. which will bring on the fact that there is now an area of the brain that has been destroyed, is going to bring on dementia soon. And so individuals who experience any of the following are at higher risk for stroke. And the reason I put this slide on is that so that you can read them and make sure that you are protected from these risk factors. High blood pressure, cigarette smoking, diabetes, irregular heart rhythm, high cholesterol, sitting on your butt, lack of exercise, unhealthy diet, previous history of stroke or heart attack, and history of peripheral vascular disease, disorders of blood clotting, and use of illegal drugs. So if you're sitting there and a person sitting in front of you suddenly shows symptoms, check them. If the face is drooping, if the arm that, both arms that are raised, one arm begins to fall, if their speech is slurred, then it is time to call 911. Why? Because stroke is now treatable in the early minutes to hours after the stroke onset. And that becomes a very important means of avoiding the stroke from getting established in the brain, which we know will ultimately lead to also memory difficulty. Stroke is preventable and treatable and eventually repairable. So we've talked about these big strokes that we can see sometimes on patients' CT scans that lead to dementia. But there is now a new variety of strokes. Instead of a major blood vessel blocking, there are small blood vessels that block. And those are called covert strokes because the patient does not feel them. Covert strokes are one that patients do not feel because it's blockage of small blood vessels, but they occur very frequently and they are a major contributors to dementia. Here is a CT scan of a patient with many of these covert stroke. This patient did not feel any of these happening, but they have risk factors for these blockages that one sees now on CT scan as these white spots. Who gets these covert strokes? Patients with high blood pressure, patients with depression. And so it's very important to make sure that you're controlling these risk factors for silent brain infarcts, covert strokes. There are risk factors, this is a recent slide, that tell us that modifiable risk factors for dementia can be avoided, such as low education, high blood pressure, high alcohol intake, obesity, and we are now adding hearing loss because any impairment in your communication with your environment, being reduced vision or reduced hearing, is going to bring on potential trouble with cognitive impairment and head injury. Controlling and correcting elevated blood pressure is very important. I do not have any benefit personally from recommending to you that you buy a blood pressure cuff and bring it home. And once a week, when you are calm, you put it on and you measure your blood pressure at home. Why is it important? As you know, there are two numbers, this systolic number, the higher number, and the diastolic number. We want the systolic number when you are calm at home and not stressed, not to be higher than 120. Every 1 millimeter increase in that number increases your risk for dementia later on by 1%. That's nothing to be laughing at. It's very important. And so the SPRINT study said 120 at rest is the goal. And I want you to acquire a blood pressure cuff. Take your blood pressure when you are in a calm environment. And if you find using blood pressure cuff challenging, ask your family physician to help you. Next, we're going to talk about a problem that is growing in our society, which is that we are all putting on weight, and the risk for obesity has increased significantly in our society. And the trend is upward. It keeps growing. This is not about fat shaming, but it is about recognizing that the fat that we accumulate around our abdomen and other places in our body is not an inert substance. It's actually putting out chemicals that go to the blood vessels in our brain and begin to block them, which is what we're trying to avoid. Obesity, not that it's easy to get rid of obesity once it is established. Obesity, it is a very important contributor to cognitive impairment over time. More than half of the global population will reach overweight or obesity status within the next 10 to 12 years. And by 2035, that's like in a couple of years, childhood obesity could more than double the 2020 rates. And poor countries face a very rapid increase in obesity rates, and access to cheap, highly processed, fat-laden foods is a major contributor to this trend. You've all worked for the federal government, and with the federal government, it's very important to understand that the acceleration of obesity is potentially preventable. In the last 5 years, 7% of those under 18 months were classified as overweight, and almost 20% were classified as suffering a risk for being overweight. In 2013, 30% of children aged 5 to 19 were classified as overweight or obese. So there is a major problem with obesity and consequent dementia that is coming down the pipeline through our society. In participants, this is a study coming that has been confirmed a number of times. There is a significant decrease in total brain volume when there is significant increase of abdominal mass. Those of us with a large belly where fat is stored are going to suffer from shrinkage of the brain over time. Subject with the highest adherence to the Mediterranean diet, I urge all of us to look up what the Mediterranean diet is and to try to stick to it as much as possible. Reduce the risk for dementia by 1/3, because obesity reprograms the brain to prefer high-calorie foods, but the Mediterranean diet reduces the risk for dementia. I work in a busy hospital. When I go to the cafeteria and sit down, I'm surrounded by my colleagues who are nurses and clinicians and medical students. I can tell you without any doubt that at least 1/3 to 1/2 of the people around me are eating while they're reading their cell phones, while they're working with their cell phone. Distraction while we're eating has become a significant problem, because those individuals who were distracted did not remember what they ate, were less full after lunch, and they ate significantly more dessert later on. So it's very important to pay attention to what we're eating and to not be doing other stuff while we're eating. The next item is about moving our butts. Physical activity in older adults provides cognitive reserve. Physical activity allows the brain to function better, and exercise slows the accumulation of those nasty proteins we talked about. Get out of breath once or twice a day. Get up from your chair, go quickly around, try to go for a quick walk, enough to be panting a little bit when you're done. Your brain needs a minimum of 1 hour, total 1 hour per week of moderate effort. 10 minutes per day, it's not a lot, but thrives on 30 minutes per day, and there is an intensity duration relationship. Look for opportunities to activate your muscles rather than looking for taking it easy. My message to you is don't take it easy, take it hard. Take stairs for less than 4 to 5 floors. Park away from the entrance at the shopping center and run to the door. At the end of, away from the door of the shopping center, there's all kinds of parking space available. Go there, it's easy to find a parking spot, and walk to the door. Disconnect from your computer and phone for 5 minutes every hour and go for a quick walk. And don't ever let me catch you in your car in a long lineup of cars going to the window to get your coffee. Park your car, get out of there, walk over to get your coffee, and walk back to your car. Here is a couple of people who are missing an opportunity to doing a bit of exercise. They're taking the automatic stairs instead of walking up the stairs, and they could have used a bit of energy walking up the stairs instead of the automatic stairwell. So escalators are not your friend. And so you saw my advice to try to move, go up the stairs. If you're going somewhere for less than 2 or 3 floors, go up the stairs and avoid the elevator. Exercise repairs the brain. Brain white matter deterioration is associated with cognitive decline. Research shows that aerobic walking and or social dancing, anything that moves you, repairs the brain and reduces the deterioration and improves memory function. The brain retains its plasticity and ability to respond to what you do, no matter how old you are. So it's never too late to begin these active exercise activities that I have recommended for you. Studies show that the brain's white matter regions that are vulnerable to aging retain their plasticity and can be induced to repair themselves by aerobic exercise. In a 2019 study, daily active minutes were positively related to sleep quality. And so walking and being physically active will also help you sleep better at night, which is a very important factor. It is only during the night when we are asleep that the brain washes itself from the debris that has accumulated during the day. So it's very important to have a good night's sleep, and being physically active will actually afford you to have a better night's sleep. Sleep deprivation accelerates brain shrinkage and has a particularly negative impact on executive function. My final slide says, socialize. Depression, sadness when it is persistent, leads to harm to memory function. Socialize and feel useful. Loneliness and depression can harm your memory function. So here are the 7 rules that I have shared with you today. Grow your brain's cognitive reserve. The earlier and the more varied the stimulation, the better. No Sudoku all day long and crossword puzzles all day long will not do it. The brain wants variety. A sick or injured brain can boggle the mind, so keep your brain healthy by monitoring and taming your vascular risk factors keeping blood pressure normal, putting away that salt shaker and stopping smoking, because all of that will help you avoid suffering strokes. Eat well and avoid obesity. The recommendation is to go with the Mediterranean diet. Put no more bacon for you folks. And so that's very important. Eat well and avoid obesity. Active lifestyle is key. Make life hard. You must sleep enough and have a positive attitude. I've put all of these ideas in books, in the two books, and one is in French and one is in English. The French one came out first. Préservez votre vitalité mentale, 7 règles pour prévenir la démence. And the second one in English is called Save Your Mind, 7 Rules to Avoid Dementia. And let me end by thanking you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. Hakim. That was very much interesting and informative. And I know what I really like about what you presented as well is it's very concrete, and your prescription is easy to remember, a little harder to follow, but easy to remember. So thank you. Now to the Q's and A's. Please go in and add your questions. There have been a couple of questions already added, so we'll start with those, but please remember to add additional questions. Dr. Hakim, one of the first questions was, you mentioned smoking, but not alcohol. Could you talk to us a bit about that as well?
Yes. The recent data, unfortunately, suggests that there is no amount of alcohol that is good for your brain. This is different from what we used to think. We used to think that 1 drink a day is better than no drink a day, but don't make it into 2 or 3 or 4 drinks a day. We now recognize the new data suggests that, in fact, unfortunately, no amount of alcohol helps the brain. So again, I think, 1 drink a day is probably not damaging, which is why there has been some debate about this over the years. But the more recent recommendation is, like you avoid smoking, avoid booze.
Okay, thank you very much. The next question relates to hearing loss. So how does hearing loss contribute to increased dementia? I wear a hearing aid. However, in group settings, it is difficult to hear everyone. What can I do to help with prevent hearing loss, adding to my dementia risk increase?
It's a very important question. And in fact, hearing loss being a contributor to dementia is a new learning. It is not something we have known for a long time. But what is becoming very clear is that anything that disconnects you from your environment, whether it's reduced vision or reduced hearing, is going to be contributing. Basically, you're not as interactive with the world around you if your hearing is reduced or if your vision is reduced. So as much as you can, try to use the aids that you need to use to be connected to the sounds that are coming from the environment. It's also important to know how soothing music can be. And if we stop hearing music, I think the quality of life is reduced. And I'm not suggesting any particular kind of music. Whatever music you like is helping you feel better. And so reduced hearing is potentially a problem.
Great, thank you. There's a couple of questions about supplements and vitamin B12. And is it important? And are there any other supplements that assist with brain health?
This is a very large topic, and the list of supplements that one can now list has become very long. The important point is this: if you eat the Mediterranean diet with its fresh fruits and vegetables and more healthy ingredients, supplements are additionally helpful, but not essential. And I have nothing against supplements, but again, these supplements, whether it's vitamin D or vitamin E or vitamin B1, they're all coming through to you in your Mediterranean diet. And so that's very important. Fresh fruits and vegetables will probably provide you with the supplements that you need. And I mean fresh. I don't mean necessarily food that is in cans.
Right. Well, this one probably links into what you just said, but there's a high thumbs up question about how much, or what about too much sugar in our diets?
Yeah, so sugar is energy, and energy, when it's too much, accumulates into fat. And so whether we are eating too much bacon or drinking too many calories because of sugar, it results in the same thing, which is that we become obese. And so it's extremely important, as I said, and I want to repeat this, that fat that we have accumulated, and believe me, I struggle with this myself. The fat that we have accumulated around our mid body parts is not inert. It is not just cold storage. It is actively putting out chemicals that are going to our blood vessels in our brain and blocking them. So it's very important to avoid obesity. Don't panic if you're 2 pounds or 5 pounds over the recommended level of weight for your height. But it's very important to keep an eye on that.
Great, thank you. The next question, Dr. Hakim, is how many hours of sleep are recommended?
Somewhere between 7 and 8 hours of good sleep. And let me give you something a piece of advice that my patients have said to me has worked for them, and let me share it with you. Sleeping sufficiently is very important for the brain because that's, as I've said, that's when the brain cleans itself up, gets rid of all the detritus that has accumulated during the day through our thinking and our active brain activity. One thing that seems to bring on better sleep is to give your brain the message that you're going to bed to sleep. And how do you do that? You do that by doing a series of activities that precede you going to bed to sleep. And that is telling your brain, oh, I see, this person is going to bed to sleep because he just went through a sequence of things. He locked the back door, he locked the front door, then he put on the alarm, then he walked down the corridor, then he brushed his teeth, then whatever sequence of things you do before you go to bed, try to do the same sequence night after night, because the brain says, oh, I see, we're heading to sleep. And that's a very important message for the brain.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, if you are overweight or obese, can losing weight later in life help improve the brain, or is it too late? Has it been lost? The damage been done?
Very, very good question, and I'm very glad somebody is asking it. So here is my mantra. It is never too late. Remember that our brain is able to heal itself. It's able to repair the damage that has accumulated in it if we acquire the good habits that I have talked to you about today. It is never too late to do the right thing, whether we're talking about obesity or high blood pressure or sedentary existence. Get it all corrected the best way you can and do it in a sequential way. Don't take it all on to yourself at once. Do one thing at a time. And to answer your question directly, yes, if we lose weight, the brain is grateful, thanks us, and gets to work repairing the damage that has already accumulated.
Well, that's great news.
Yeah.
Our next question is, how do you tell the difference between the onset of dementia and so-called normal memory loss, such as what was your name and how did I get into what did I come into this room for?
I would begin to worry if I come into a room and I don't know why I came into the room. There is such a thing as working memory. If I park my car in a garage I'm not familiar with, and it has 4 floors and 6 doors of entrances, it may be easy to forget where the car was parked. That in itself is not a problem. But what we all have to do now is, when we park our car, is imprint that memory in our brain. Yes, okay, so here is where the car is, and repeat it to yourself a couple of times. It's very important to try to embed in our brain the memories that we know are transitory, that we're not going to need them, because that is making our brain work harder and learn how to remember things. It's not the end. Do not panic that you're suffering from dementia if you don't remember the name of somebody you have only seen very infrequently. That's very normal. The brain is very busy remembering important things and is not going to remember everything you expose it to. But it may be a signal that, okay, I need to get working harder to make this brain remember things more easily. It is more, I had a colleague whose mother became demented, and she went to a home where he went to visit her once. And she said, and he was just coming from work, and she said to him, "Oh, you look very handsome, sir." And he said, "Yes, Mom, I'm always handsome. I'm your son." She looked at him and she said, "You're my son?" And he was devastated that his mother had forgotten who he is. So it's one thing to not remember somebody you meet once in a great while. It's a whole different kettle of fish if you don't remember somebody who's supposed to be very close to you. So don't panic if the first happens, but get to work.
Thank you. I like that idea of imprinting where I parked. That's most important. The next question is low blood pressure as dangerous as high blood pressure for your brain?
Well, first of all, let's remember that blood is a liquid. And if I suddenly stand up, the blood that's a liquid is going to try to get to my legs and is not going to my brain. What sends it to my brain is blood pressure. So it is important not to have very low blood pressure, because then if I stand up with very low blood pressure, I'm going to get dizzy. I may fall and fracture my hip, and that's not fun. So if your blood pressure is low, it's and what do I mean by that?
Yes.
You're sitting at home, you're relaxed, you put on the blood pressure cuff, and you measure the blood pressure when you're relaxed. And the higher number, if it is, 90 or 100, it doesn't matter so long as when you stand up, you're not feeling dizzy. But if you do feel dizzy and the higher number in your blood pressure is low, then it's time to maybe talk to your physician, or do not allow yourself to get dehydrated. Drink those 6 glasses of water a day and make sure you drink them. Yes, you don't just keep it in your refrigerator, but they're there for you to consume. And see if that does correct your blood pressure. The important thing is whether you feel dizzy when you stand up or you don't. If you don't, then don't worry about the fact that your blood pressure that you measured was a bit low, because that is not a problem.
And there was another question linked to that. I believe the answer was 120, but there was a request to repeat what is the normal systolic figure for your blood pressure?
The normal systolic figure is when you are calm, when you are relaxed, not when your cell phone is going and the phone is ringing and you're surrounded by colleagues. No, that's not. When you're isolated, quiet, and you put on the blood pressure, you calm yourself down, the higher number, the systolic number, should not exceed 120 when you are calm. Please don't panic if it's 125, but I don't want it to be 125 regularly when you measure your blood pressure again and again. I want it to be 120 or less.
Okay, great. Thank you. Is it too late to start dementia prevention at 70?
At what?
At 70 years old?
Oh, no, not at all. I mean, listen, life expectancy is getting later and later, longer and longer. I can show you the statistics of how many of us are going to be around past the age of 90. And that number is getting bigger and bigger all the time. So absolutely not. It is never too late to do well. And it's never too late to try to follow the 7 rules that I've suggested and to protect your brain as much as possible.
Great. There's also several people interested to know, is arthritis linked to dementia?
I am not aware that arthritis is linked to dementia directly, but if arthritis is preventing you from moving, is preventing you from getting out of breath once in a while, is preventing you from being physically active, then that's the link between arthritis and cognitive impairment, is that it may prevent you from, but again, if you have arthritis, what about going swimming? Maybe that is something that you could do that allows you to get out of breath and be physically active even though you have arthritis. In other words, look for some activity that is compatible with your arthritis, because it is very important for the brain for us to get out of breath once in a while due to physical activity.
Super, thank you. The next question is dementia hereditary? Can a healthier lifestyle impact my genetics, my genetic predisposition?
Those are 2 very important questions, and I'm glad they have come up. Yes, there is a form of dementia that is hereditary. Very important to recognize that it impacts probably less than 5% of the demented population. Having said that, even if you have inherited dementia from your family line, the advice that I've provided you today will help you protect your brain against hereditary dementia. It is not a big problem, but yes, there is a percentage of the population, a relatively small percentage, that suffers from hereditary dementia, but they would do themselves a big favor by following these 7 rules anyway. There was a novel written about that I have enjoyed reading. Anyway.
Good. Yes. Excellent. The next topic is about enough sleep. The question is, if I don't get enough sleep at night, say only 6 or 7 hours, Does taking a nap during the day for less than an hour make up for it, or do I have to sleep all at once?
Oh, no. A nap can help. A nap in the afternoon is something that a lot of older people do because they have the time and they can afford the luxury of doing it. Sleep is a cumulative event, and if you have a good nap in the afternoon, then yes, you're allowed to sleep less than 8 hours during the night, because the brain looks for sleep regardless of when you're having that sleep, for an opportunity to wash itself from the debris and detritus that has accumulated while you were working the brain. It's also very important that it is during sleep that our memory becomes consolidated. And so it's very important to get enough hours of sleep during the day, regardless of how you subdivide it.
Thank you. There's a couple of questions around the topic of, can you figure out where you are in your trajectory towards dementia? Like, is there a checklist to see where you are, or to see if you already have brain damage?
Well, those are two separate questions.
Okay.
To see how much brain damage is really only a CT scan or an MRI scan. To go to the first part of the question, there are now online tests that you can do to see whether you're having some cognitive impairment. And these are not difficult tests to do. It takes one person to give you the test and one person to take the test. But there's a number of them that are now available. It's also, by the way, the test that the Automobile Association will do on you when you go there at the age of 75 or 80 to renew your driver's license. That's the test that they give you to see whether you should be allowed to continue driving or not.
Hey, we have a question too, sort of linked to that, but it's about covert strokes. How do we know if we're having them, if we don't know we're having them? And especially if you suffer from migraines and auras, how do you know the difference, and how can I fix it if I can't stop my migraine?
It's a very important question, because migraine, particularly when they are chronic, is a vascular problem. The good news is that there are now very significant ways in which we can prevent chronic migraines from happening. And so if you are suffering regularly from migraine headaches, do talk to your physician if you haven't done so in a while, because there are new treatments available for migraine headaches. And migraine headaches, because the vessels in our brain are involved in the onset of migraine and while we're suffering from the headaches, can be associated with these small blood vessels getting blocked. Unfortunately, the only way you can decide whether you have this small vessel disease is to do a CT scan or an MRI scan. There is no other way of knowing that for sure. And it's also important to remember that as we get older, even though we have followed all of the 7 rules that Dr. Hakim shared with us this morning, it is possible to have 1 or 2 spots of small vessel disease occlusion. It is sort of a natural process, but we don't want too many of those scars in the brain.
Right. Question about concussions. We've heard that there are studies that say yes and no, that there are increased dementia risks with repeated concussions, whether minor or major.
There is no doubt about the link between repeated concussions and dementia. And the link is through small blood vessels getting shook up and blocking. Cassius Clay died of dementia. And it's very important to remember that many of our football players, as they have, when we didn't know how to protect their brains from concussions during the game, have unfortunately suffered from dementia. It's very important to avoid concussions. If you're in a job that results in concussions or can make concussions happen, then use the right kind of helmet and try to avoid them as much as possible.
Good, very good. Okay, we have a question related to linking inflammation with dementia. And if there is a link, what are some ways of countering inflammation?
It's a very, very important question. Dr. Hakim wrote a review article a couple of years ago, which got a lot of attention, in which I asked the question, what is it about lack of sleep and obesity and sedentary existence? What is it about all these risk factors for dementia that links them to what happens in the brain? And the answer is, it's inflammation. The big belly that I can have, that fat is talking to my brain blood vessels through inflammatory molecules that it puts out. And the same is true when we become sedentary. These muscles put out, when we move them, they put out good anti-inflammatory molecules that help reduce the inflammation in our body. So yes, inflammation is the link between all of the 7 sins that I have talked about that lead to dementia and the ultimate outcome. The important thing to remember is 2 things. We're not talking about taking drugs against inflammation. Inflammation is a very large topic, and there is no drug against inflammation. The important thing to remember is that the 7 rules that Dr. Hakim shared with you today are all anti-inflammatory. And the sooner you get into them, the less inflammation you will have running around in your body.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There's a few questions about why women are more impacted by dementia, and is there any link to being postmenopausal and those links? So why women, and is there anything women can do specifically?
Well, it's very interesting. The reason women seem to suffer more dementia is a statistical trick. And the reason for that is they're not more vulnerable to dementia. It is just that they live longer than the men do. So if you're looking at who is around after the age of 70 or 80, it is many more women than men who are alive at those late age groups. So that it isn't that they are more at risk for dementia, it is just that there is more women who are enjoying long life, and therefore one tends to think that they're more likely to suffer from dementia, but it's not true. Menopause is a vascular event that all women will go through at some time or another, but it is very important to remember that the 7 rules or the 7 helpful ideas that I've shared with you will also neutralize whatever can be caused by this issue that affects women.
Well, thank you. I know our time is running short, so I'm going to try and combine a bunch of questions together, and I'll repeat them for you, Dr. Hakim, if necessary. There's a series of questions about how different things.
You're testing my memory, are you?
Oh, no, I'll help you. I'll prompt you. But you've imprinted it, right? So, okay. Well, there's about 6 different things that people have asked if they affect dementia. I'll go through them and then we can go one at a time. The use of caffeine, the impact of chemo, using omegas, artificial sweeteners, and cannabis. So first with caffeine, maybe we could start there.
Well, I'm not going to be able to answer. These other items that you have mentioned have not been studied
Okay.
in terms of their impact on either small vessel disease in the brain or vascular health or dementia.
Okay.
Yeah, caffeine is within limit. Caffeine is actually helpful. I would say 2 coffees a day is probably the best part of the curve, and anything much more than that can become a problem. But caffeine is a vascular drug, and so it's important. I mean, Johann Sebastian Bach wouldn't have written half of the lovely music that he has written if it wasn't for the fact that he loved coffee. And so there's nothing wrong with coffee, just don't make it excessive.
Chemo brain we've heard of.
Yes, chemotherapy is a significant issue. The way we kill cancer is to poison its blood supply, and we cannot do that and completely protect the normal blood supply that's going to our brain. If that's something that you have unfortunately endured, be alert to the possibility that you may need to do more things than your neighbor to try to counteract the possibility of dementia.
Artificial sweeteners?
I don't like them. I don't recommend them. They are chemicals that you're putting in your body. I don't think they are necessary, but if you pin me against the wall and say, are they a problem for dementia? I am not sure I know how to answer that question. But I don't like them because they are chemicals that we are introducing in our body. We consume a lot of chemicals already, which is what I have against bacon. How do you think, bacon became something that you can consume years after it was prepared? Nothing against bacon, but any food that has been conserved for a long time has chemicals in it. And so that is what I think we need to avoid.
Okay. And the very last question, I know there's a lot more, and I apologize to those who posed them, is anxiety and depression related to dementia?
Yes, that was item number 7 in
your list. Yeah.
I have presented. Anxiety in and by itself is not a problem, but if you begin to have anxiety, that may be the signal that you need to start working on how to avoid what comes next. And that is that anxiety often is the harbinger for sadness, for depression. And so we need to really be alert to the fact that chronic anxiety, all of us become anxious when we're going to give a talk to 800 people. But if anxiety is chronic, it begins to interfere with our sleep on a chronic basis, then it's time to look into it and try to protect our brain from this issue that will significantly impair its function.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Dr. Hakim, for answering so many questions and for such an interesting. Sorry, go ahead.
I was told that this was the last question, so
It was. So I was thanking you. Yeah.
I want to end by, again, as I started, thanking all of you who have worked in the federal government for all the services you have rendered to our country over the years. and I was very honored to share this talk with you.
Well, thank you. It was so informative, so concrete, and so helpful, speaking on behalf of everyone. We can't thank you enough, and we look forward to your book and looking at the slides as well. Et merci beaucoup, Sam, et outre de nous avons fait cette suggestion pour tout de votre soutien dans la réalisation de ce webinaire. We also want to do a special shout out to Nancy McDonald and Natasha Hollywood in Dr. Hakim's office, who helped us to prepare today. And of course, a special thank you to our own Association Ottawa office team of Linda and Antoine. Thank you. So just to conclude, please watch for our email, which will include instructions on how to access the video recording of today's webinar and the coordinates for Dr. Hakim's book. I know I want to look at it again. And again, please circulate the webinar link to those who you think might be interested, because it is really important information. Assurez-vous de surveiller notre email qui vous fournir les informations sur la façon d'accéder à l'enregistrement vidéo ainsi que le titre du livre de Dr. Hakim. Again, if you are not a member of our association, we encourage you to join us so that you can regularly participate in our webinar program, learn about our advocacy work to protect our federal pensions and benefits, as well as the many discounts, and there are many that you'll have access to. And to all our branch members today, thank you for your support. And we encourage you to continue to help us grow by recruiting new members. And as you know, there's a contest on right now where you can win some great prizes, including $10,000 in cash, courtesy of Johnson's Insurance, for helping us recruit new members. Nous inclurons des détails sur la campagne de recrutement annuel et le concours dans notre email de suivi. So once again, thank you. And thank you, Dr. Hakim, and we'll see you at our next event.
Thank you.